Before we dive in, if you believe that real heroes don't always wear their stories on their sleeves, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest history, make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you into a moment that no one on that Marine base will ever forget. It began with a shadow box, dusty, sealed, untouched for years, sitting in an old storage office beside the medical wing, its glass smeared, its corners worn down by time. Most people walked past it without a second glance, assuming it was just another forgotten decoration left behind by someone long retired. But then a young private, barely 19, preparing the room for incoming injured personnel, tilted the box accidentally, and the latch slipped open for the first time in decades. And what spilled out shouldn't have even existed on a forgotten base shelf. Metals pinned to faded velvet that no one in the room had ever seen before. Valor ribbons, foreign commendations, a distinguished service cross with a burn mark through the ribbon, and underneath them, a letter signed by a general, the ink still bold despite the years, commending a soldier whose name wasn't on any roster they recognized. And that was the warning, the whisper, the foreshadowing, proof that sometimes the greatest heroes walk unseen until the moment the world is forced to see them. And that brings us to the day staff Sergeant Lena Ortiz, 28 years old, wounded and limping, walked quietly across the Marine base courtyard with nothing but a battered duffel bag, a sling supporting her injured shoulder, and exhaustion heavy in her eyes. She wasn't there for ceremonies, recognition, or applause, just routine medical evaluation after returning stateside from a mission that had left her with shrapnel scars across her arm, ribs aching, and memories she carried far more painfully than the wounds. But the Marines posted near the gym entrance didn't see any of that. All they saw was a woman their age, Army, not Marine, walking slow, limping slightly, her uniform wrinkled from travel. A perfect target for their boredom and bravado. "Yo, check it out," one snickered, elbowing his buddy. "Army's sending us broken toys now." Another, taller and louder, added, "Bet she got that sling tripping over her own boots." Their laughter hit the air sharp and careless, the kind that fills the space where empathy should be. Lena heard every word, but she didn't break stride. She didn't glare, didn't speak, didn't defend herself. She just adjusted her back, winced as the sling tugged her shoulder, and kept moving. That only fueled them. "Damn, she's really committed to the limp," another Marine joked, shaking his head. Oscar-worthy performance. And the worst part wasn't their voices. It was how easily they dismissed her existence. How quickly they wrote her off as weak, fragile, less. What none of them knew, what none of them even thought to wonder, was that Lena had been injured because she had thrown herself in front of two civilians during a convoy attack, shielding them as a secondary blast tore through the road, ripping metal like paper and shattering bone. She dragged another soldier by his vest through debris and burning sand, crawling on one good arm until her knees gave out. She wasn't limping because she was weak. She was walking because she survived. But at that base, in that moment, she was invisible. Almost. Because one person noticed. A young corporal standing near the ID checkpoint watched her with a different kind of attention. He saw the medic patch. He saw the burn scars across her knuckles. He saw the purple heart pinned to the side of her back. Subtle, almost hidden, but unmistakable to anyone who respected what it meant. And when she reached the gate scanner and struggled with her sling to hold her ID steady, he stepped forward to help, speaking softly, respectfully. "Ma'am, let me get that for you." Lena looked at him with tired gratitude. "Thanks. Long flight." But before he could say more, the mocking Marines walked past again, intentionally loud. "Careful, Corporal," one said, grinning. "Talk too nice, and you'll make her cry. Or she'll tell her commander." Another jeered. "And you'll get stuck filling out hurt feelings reports." The young corporal opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't have to, because at that exact moment, alarms erupted across the base. A sharp, piercing wail that cut through conversation and pride alike. Smoke billowed up from the lower motor pool, thick and dark. A mechanical failure. A training accident. Panic. Marines sprinted toward the rising smoke, but not the ones who mocked her. They froze, unsure, startled, waiting for direction that no one had given yet. And Lena didn't hesitate. Sling and limp be damned. She took off toward the smoke with instinctive urgency, moving faster than anyone had seen a wounded soldier move. The corporal stood stunned as she disappeared into the haze. Then he ran after her, shouting for help, shouting that someone was inside the garage. And the Marines who had been laughing seconds earlier, they stared. Silent now, fear replacing arrogance as the truth began rising like the smoke itself. They had underestimated someone whose courage had already been proven in fire far worse than this. And what Lena would do in the next few minutes would silence every doubt they'd ever held. Because that sealed shadow box, those medals the private found, that letter from a general praising bravery beyond duty, they weren't relics of some forgotten hero. They were the first clue, and Lena was the next chapter. And the Marines were about to learn, hard and fast, that mocking a wounded soldier is easy, until the moment she shows you exactly who she is. The smoke poured upward in thick, violent rolls, turning the morning sky a bruised gray as Staff Sergeant Lena Ortiz limped straight into it without a second of hesitation, her injured arm pounding with every step, her good hand gripping the fire extinguisher she'd snatched on her way down the ramp. And behind her the base erupted into frantic motion. Boots pounding pavement, half-finished conversations dropped mid-sentence, radios crackling with confused reports. But Lena didn't hear any of it. Didn't need any of it, because her instincts had already taken over. Those same instincts that had kept her alive overseas, that had made her run toward explosions when everyone else ran away. And as she reached the motor pool entrance, she barely paused long enough to cover her mouth with her sleeve before plunging inside. The heat slammed into her face like a physical hit, a wave of suffocating air that made her eyes sting instantly. But she pushed forward, scanning through the flickering orange light, until she spotted a Marine collapsed near the back of the garage, pinned under a fallen tool cart, coughing violently as flames licked up the side of the vehicle beside him. Without waiting for backup, she sprinted, or as close to sprinting as her injured leg allowed, dropping to her knees beside him and yanking the cart up with a grunt that tore through her ribs. Pain flashed white-hot through her shoulder as the sling jerked, but she held it, teeth clenched, refusing to let go until the Marine dragged himself free and crawled toward the exit. She didn't follow him out. Instead, she turned deeper into the motor pool, scanning for more, knowing, because she could hear it in the strained groans of metal and the popping sparks from overhead wiring, that the fire hadn't been contained, that something else was about to go wrong. And it did. A second explosion, small but sharp, rattled the structure, knocking debris from the beams and sending a shock wave of dust across the concrete floor. The corporal who'd followed her earlier shouted her name from the entrance, voice cracking with fear, but Lena ignored him. She spotted movement behind a smoking Humvee and stumbled toward it, finding another Marine slumped behind the tire, half-conscious, bleeding from a gash across his forehead. She grabbed him by the vest, her injured arm screaming in protest as she dragged him inch by inch toward the doorway, gasping against the burning air but refusing to stop. The corporal finally reached them, grabbing the Marine's other arm and helping pull him the rest of the way out of the garage, shouting for corpsmen, shouting for extinguishers, shouting for anyone with oxygen masks. But by the time he turned back, Lena was already gone, having limped back into the flames for a third time. Outside, the Marines who had mocked her earlier stood frozen, helmets half-buckled, gloves dangling, the reality of what they were witnessing slowly sinking into their faces. They watched her silhouette reappear through the smoke only to vanish again, watched her stumble, but continue, watched her sacrifice her own body without hesitation, and every second hammered their guilt deeper. They had laughed at her, laughed at someone who moved like a soldier who had already given more than any of them ever had. Inside the motor pool, the fire crackled louder as another vehicle caught, sending sparks arcing across the floor like angry insects. Lena's breath grew shallow, her vision blurring, but she kept going, searching, calling out, listening for any sound that didn't belong to the fire. She found one, a faint tap, rhythmic, deliberate. Someone trapped. She followed the sound, weaving around debris until she reached a storage cage whose metal door had warped shut from the heat. Behind it, a young Marine was crouched, coughing violently, eyes wide with panic as the metal above the cage began to sag. "Back up," Lena shouted, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the flames. She swung the fire extinguisher like a battering ram, the impact vibrating. up her injured arm so hard she nearly dropped it, but she hit it again, once, twice, 3 times, until the lock snapped and the door flew open. She grabbed the Marine by his collar and hauled him out just as a section of ceiling caved in behind them, showering sparks where he had been seconds earlier. By the time she pushed him toward the corporal waiting by the exit, her knees nearly buckled beneath her. Her hair clung to her face, soaked in sweat, her uniform smeared with soot, her lungs burning as if she'd inhaled fire itself. But she forced one more breath into her body and turned back one last time, scanning the inferno to make sure no one remained. The corporal ran toward her, grabbing her good arm. "Staff Sergeant, that's enough. You'll collapse." But she shook her head, dazed, determined. "Everyone out?" she rasped. "Everyone," he promised. "You got them. All of them." For a moment she swayed, staring back into the flames as if her body wouldn't believe it, as if she wasn't allowed to stop until the world was finished needing her. But then her knees gave way and the corporal caught her, lowering her to the ground as medics rushed forward with oxygen tanks and stretchers. The Marines who had mocked her earlier approached in silence, their faces drained of arrogance, replaced with something Lena rarely saw from men who prided themselves on toughness: shame. One of them stepped forward, voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, we didn't know." Lena pulled the oxygen mask away long enough to speak. Her voice cracked, but sharp enough to cut. "You didn't ask." Then she let the mask fall back into place as medics lifted her onto a stretcher, carrying her toward the medical wing while the base commander, drawn by the alarms, arrived and surveyed the chaos, his eyes narrowing as one of the rescued Marines pointed toward Lena, signaling who had pulled them all out. The commander's jaw tightened, his expression shifting from concern to indignation as he looked to the group of Marines who stood rigid and ashamed, knowing the storm heading their way had only just begun. Because he recognized her. He knew exactly who she was. And by the time he finished speaking to them, every one of those Marines would understand just how deeply they had misjudged the wounded woman they mocked less than an hour ago. Lena Ortiz hadn't just saved a few Marines in a fire. She had revealed them, exposed them, and the reckoning was about to begin. The base commander's boots struck the pavement with a sharp, controlled rhythm as he marched toward the shaken group of Marines, the air still thick with smoke, the sound of distant sirens echoing off the concrete walls. And when he reached them, when he saw the guilt frozen across their faces, his expression hardened into something that made even the most seasoned among them stiffen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Which of you," he asked quietly, "mock my soldier?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The Marines who had laughed at Lena stared down at their boots, suddenly wishing the smoke would swallow them whole. Before any of them could stammer out an answer, the commander lifted a hand, cutting them off. "No," he said. "I'll hear it from her." He turned and walked with purpose toward the medical wing, the Marines trailing behind like condemned men. And when they entered the triage room, they saw Lena sitting upright on a cot, oxygen mask off now, her hair still singed at the ends, her uniform streaked with soot, her good arm wrapped with gauze while a medic cleaned the angry burn on her shoulder. She looked exhausted, but unbroken, and when she saw the commander, she actually tried to stand. "At ease, Ortiz," he said softly, guiding her gently back onto the cot. "You did enough for 10 men today." The Marines behind him winced at the word men, because they knew he meant it. The commander turned to face them fully now. "These Marines," he said, gesturing toward the ashamed group, "seem to have forgotten the most basic principle of this uniform." His gaze swept across them, sharp and cold. "We honor courage. We respect sacrifice. We do not mock the wounded, especially when their wounds were earned protecting the lives of others." One Marine finally broke, voice trembling. "Sir, we didn't know who she was." The commander's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." And then, with a motion that silenced the entire room, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, the same one that had once held the commendation letter from that forgotten shadow box. He handed it to the nearest Marine. "Read it," he ordered. The Marine swallowed hard and began reading aloud, his voice shaking as he recited the words of a general commending Lena for dragging 3 Marines and 2 civilians out of a burning convoy after a mortar strike overseas, detailing how she used her own body to shield a private from the secondary explosion, How she refused evacuation until every injured person was lifted out. How she nearly bled out before allowing herself to be treated. Every sentence landed with the weight of a hammer. When he finished, the room was silent. The commander's voice dropped to a low, unforgiving rumble. She protected your brothers. She protected strangers. She protected people she'd never met. And while she fought for her life, you mocked her limp. The Marines' faces were blotched red now. Embarrassment, regret, the crushing realization that this was not some random soldier they had belittled, but a woman whose bravery dwarfed their pride. The corporal stepped forward then, clearing his throat nervously. Sir, with respect, she didn't hesitate. She went back into that fire 3 times. Lena finally spoke, her voice tired but steady. Anyone would have. The commander shook his head. Not anyone, but you did. And then, unexpectedly, he turned to the Marines. Line up, he ordered quietly. They obeyed, forming a rigid row beside her cot. Lena watched with confusion as the commander faced them, hands behind his back. You are going to apologize, he said. And you are going to mean it. One by one, the Marines stepped forward. The first swallowed hard. Staff Sergeant Ortiz. I'm sorry. I misjudged you. The next, I'm sorry for what I said. I was out of line. Another, you saved my friends. And I laughed at you. I was wrong. Lena listened, expression unreadable. When the last Marine finished, she didn't scold them. She didn't humiliate them. She simply breathed out, slow and controlled. Just treat the next wounded soldier with respect, she said. That's all I want. The commander nodded approvingly. Dismissed. But before the Marines could leave, a commotion stirred in the hallway. Voices, hurried footsteps. One of the rescued Marines, still limping on a wrapped ankle, pushed through the door, insisting on being wheeled in because he had something to say. His face was pale, smoke still lingering in his hair. Man, if you hadn't come back for me, he paused, voice catching, I wouldn't be here. Another Marine, one she had dragged from behind the Humvee, spoke next. You saved my life today, and you barely know my name. Lena's eyes softened, just a little. Names don't matter, she said quietly. Lives do. The room fell silent again, not in guilt this time, but in something heavier, deeper, respect. The kind that can't be demanded, only earned through fire and sacrifice. Later, when Lena was finally cleared to rest, the commander walked her to a private recovery room. Before she stepped inside, he stopped her. Ortiz, he said gently, there's something I want to return to you. He held out the shadow box, the one that had opened that morning, the one filled with medals and buried history. Lena froze, eyes widening, breath catching. Sir, where did you? It was yours, he said. Stored years ago, forgotten by everyone except the people who mattered. It's time you kept it. As she traced the medals with trembling fingers, the commander added, you aren't just a wounded soldier. You're a hero. And today reminded this base exactly what that word means. And when Lena finally sat down, shadowbox in her lap, the events of the day seemed to settle around her like dust, heavy but honest. She hadn't walked onto the base looking for redemption, or recognition, or respect. She had simply walked forward, the same way she always had, giving what she had left because someone needed her. And the Marines who mocked her? They never forgot her. Not the way she limped. Not the way she disappeared into fire. Not the way she answered arrogance with duty. Because in the end, they didn't regret their words because they were punished. They regretted them because the woman they underestimated was the reason their friends were alive. And for the rest of their careers, anytime a wounded soldier walked past, they stood a little straighter, a little quieter, a little more aware that heroes don't always look like the stories told about them. Sometimes they limp.